Welcome to Handscape, a podcast for makers that shape their lives around themselves creatively. I am very happy to share here with you the stories of incredible people just like you and take you with me through their beautiful creative journeys. Today is the first episode and I had the pleasure to talk to a lovely creative soul, Mimi from Berlin. She has a powerful energy and an incredible imagination. She is the maker behind the Yarnchix podcast and the Yarnchix Zine. She's also an avid knitter and a storyteller. Here she shares a little bit more of her story and what inspires her. Pick up that coffee and those needles and have a listen.
So I grew up in Frankfurt. I might have to say all this again because I forgot to press record. But I can do that again.
Okay.
So I grew up.
Good. We need a coffee.
I made a tea, but it's in the kitchen. So I grew up in Frankfurt, Frankfurt am Main is in Hessen, so it's in the sort of middle of Germany, and a little town called Kronberg. When I was a child, I was already starting to get into photography and making, and I was knitting when I was around 6 or 7. And in school we had also craft classes, so we were embroidering and also woodwork, so I enjoyed that as a child. And in my teenage years, I was very political. I became a member of the youth party for the Green Party, and I went to the European Youth Parliament, which was very exciting because it meant speaking in public and in front of a huge audience about things that mattered to me, and I enjoyed that very much. And then later on in my youth, sort of towards the end of school, I was part of the art class, so I did that for my A-levels. I did A-levels art and chemistry, and in art we had one term where we were actually performing for the International Women's Day, and that was sort of an eye-opener for me because I was preparing the performance. I was part of a group organizing something. I got on stage and I very much loved documenting everything we'd done. I had documented things before the performance and the sort of the planning out, and then there was a photographer who took photographs of the actual performance when we were on stage, and afterwards I created this sort of booklet, or it's more like a portfolio, and I enjoyed that so much that I realized that this was really where I wanted to go. So when I was 19, I signed up for an art and performance art degree in the UK. So I went to study in Brighton.
Art and creativity has always been in your daily life since you were a child, right?
Always. Also because of my family, because there was always creative stuff going on, and my mum worked as a social worker, so we would go along to her youth and child club, which involved a lot of woodwork, silk screen. We were doing sort of macrame. So I learned a lot of these skills in my sort of afternoon life as a child already. And it just got more and more important to me, so that I don't know, from the perspective now, I think I know it was never, at the time, I was really dreaming for it to become like my daily life to keep creating. And I was always aware it wasn't going to be a career, you won't be, you don't necessarily get rich making performance art, but it was a passion that I wanted to follow.
And how about the knitting? When did you learn how to do it?
The knitting I learned from my grandma, and my mother was also knitting, but she is more of a crochet artist. Also, still today, she produces crochet hats and sells them. So crochet was at home and knitting was with grandma when I visited her, and she showed me when I was I always say 5, but I reckon it would have been more like school age, 6 or 7. It feels like I was 5 when I learned it. And I knitted a little vest, like a waistcoat for my teddy bear, in this terrible it was like one of those yarns, that is what's it
acrylic
called?
Or
No, it wasn't really acrylic, but it's got a special name. I've forgotten because we just sold out. There was like a Rowan quality of it. It's very 80s because this was like mid 80s.
Which color it was?
Oh, it was like a cream white, white. And I think my mum still has it because she still has the teddy bear and he was always wearing it. And it was very loosely knit, and that's what I realized when you start knitting, especially as a child, you don't know what gauge is, so you just start somewhere, and it was very loose, so it looked a bit like a sort of piece of netting, especially with this. It looked a bit like a hammock when it was finished.
I can totally imagine that is.
And I, stitched up the top here and there, and then, it sort of and it was so loose the button will just go through any hole. But yeah, that was from my grandma. She was very keen on teaching me, and she never taught me how to knit socks, although she knits all our socks. So that's something I'm trying to teach myself slowly.
And have you been knitting through all your life, or there was moments where you just stopped and you focused more on other things, and then now it's...
Yeah, I think I stopped for a long time when I was basically all through my teenage years. I didn't knit a thing. I remember having lots of sweaters or cutouts of sort of fashionable sweaters on my wall and really wanting to have them and telling my grandma, you knit me something like this? Because I was always wearing these really cropped knitted sweaters, but I went out and, I was babysitting, earning money and spending that money on clothes. And it was mainly at the time Henny's, which was very new. H&M now, it was very new at the time. So I wore these knitted sweaters or knitted sort of summer tops. But I didn't knit them myself. And I never had the sort of, made that connection of, I know the skill, I should make myself garments. I think because I was so, knitting straight lines, maybe scarves or things as a child, I never realized that I could make that step. I'd have to push myself. And my grandma never made me the sweaters that I showed her from the magazines. She did make me a sweater that looked very different to what I wanted. So I was like, thank you, but I knew that it had been lots of work, but it definitely wasn't the sort of cropped sweater I was dreaming about. So I picked up my needles again after I finished my degree. So I was 21 or 22 at the time when I was part of an artist group, because I was working as a personal assistant to an artist, and her friends were hosting an event at the V&A called Craft Rocks, I think. It was an amazing event. It was an evening event, and you'd got knitting needles and wool, and it was 8mm needles, and you got wool for free, so you got the material for free. Someone had sponsored them, and we're having this amazing party in the sort of lobby of the V&A, which is an amazing space. And there was lots of knitters sitting everywhere, and I saw the sort of British way of knitting, where people were holding, the back of the needles and knitting at the front, and I was like, I couldn't work out what they were doing. But I started up knitting again. It was a ribbed scarf, and I striped it crazily with these 4 colors that I got for free from this table of freebies. And I carried on knitting all that summer, and it really helped me through a very difficult time of choosing to leave Britain and going back to Berlin. And I think I finished the scarf once I'd moved back to Berlin, and I made 2 pom-poms with the leftover, yarn, and the scarf was sort of asymmetric because when I first started it was obviously wider and it got narrower, and then at the narrow bit I just put the 2 pom-poms to sort of make up for that difference. And it would sort of, you know, tie around, and then the pom-poms would come out around, you know, this end or that end. They'd just sort of pop out and they'd sort of seal the scarf onto my neck in such a nice way. I was always really proud. And one winter I lent it to a friend and she never returned it. But I guess maybe the moths got it in her house because she had a moth issue.
No.
So maybe it's better she didn't return it.
It's clear there is something about your eyes when you talk about all these things, that your eyes bright.
Yeah.
It's clear that this is you need to make things, and I have the feeling that you make every day, right?
Yes.
Every day something has to be done, right?
Yes, definitely. And I think I spend a lot of time making, also because of my daily job. Because at the moment I work in a wool shop, so when I get there, often it's, you know, the usual thing that you would do in a shop. You tidy up, you clean the floor, you look through the shelves, maybe there's a delivery. Oh, that was my window.
No problem.
I'll close it. So, and then maybe there's a delivery, so I will have to go through that. But at some point, and that's completely acceptable at my work, I will sit and knit during my work hours, because it's both inviting for the people who are coming in, you know, even people seeing from the outside, there's someone sitting there. It sort of draws people in, I think, to the shop. Sometimes I feel people are more likely to come in and say, "Hi, what are you doing? I saw you were knitting there," when it's a quiet moment, like the summer, or some days are just quiet in the morning. So that's especially why you get all the sort of cleaning and tidying up done in the early hours. But also, I'm super thankful for having that as part of my daily routine, that by working in a wool shop I get to knit. And I knit samples for the shop. At the moment, the whole shop window display towards the front. So we have a shop, that window that is like an L shaped, and the whole front of the shop is all my knitwear, because I brought in all my Anna Maltz knits to do a little exhibition, because she's coming to Berlin next week. And that's really nice to see. I have produced so much over the years that I can make a little exhibition of it. Yeah, and that's another part where I can be creative at work, is I can, you know, set up a window display and combine different colors of wool in the shop window to hopefully entice people to come in and have a look and feel inspired and ask about what they can see in the window, and then maybe find the book on our shelf. And yeah, it's nice to have that as that is my daily routine, that I, you know, go to work, but I get to sit and knit there, let's say, you know, maybe half an hour, and then in total I might have knitted 1.5 hours, you know, on and off whilst at work. And it's acceptable. So that's amazing.
I didn't know you work in a wool shop. That's funny.
Yeah, I started about 1.5 years ago, and I was only working 1 day a week. And this year I went part-time, so 3 days a week in a wool shop. And then the other 2 days I spend organizing things at home, because, you know, the household needs running. And also my podcast, or I will write for my zine, or I will create posts for my Patreon. So the Tuesdays and Wednesdays are dedicated to all my own creative outlet. Our house is always messy, because I'm also almost everyday creative, whilst you know, this table is our dining table, so sometimes for us to eat I have to tidy off all my sewing, or you know, sort of where I've sort of put different colors of yarn out. I'll have to tidy that up before we can eat our dinner. So that's sometimes a bit crazy that I don't have my own studio space yet. But who knows? One day, maybe.
But you know, a messy house is I always say that a messy house is always an alive place, you know?
Yeah.
If it's messy, there is something going on there, and that's important. If it's everything, you know, too clean,
Yeah.
too perfect, something is dead there. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and it's not so easy to grab something and get going. I think I need to structure my art material better so that the kids can also get in on the action. I've realized that with reading the book, I think I saw you also had the book a Creative Family Manifesto by Amanda Solblack. I think her last name is a double name, Soul Mama with an E, and that book really opened my eyes to how approachable your material needs to be, or how ready it can be. And I realized, because I have everything in boxes, and the boxes are on top of one another, that makes the things not approachable for the kids. I can just easily, I'll have to move all the boxes to get to my paint, or I'll have to put the fabric, away before I can get the paint box out, or I have a photography box with like a Polaroid camera and sort of different bits of camera in. That's somewhere at the back, so I can easily move that, but for the kids it's not so accessible. So that's sort of my next thing, my next homemaking project, is to just get a shelf, so the boxes can be on the shelf and you can pull them out, and everyone in the family can choose, I want to work with the fabrics, or where's the glue, and they see where it is, because at the moment it was sort of in a box at the bottom. So I find that is actually quite nice to take those inspirations from a book like the Creative Family Manifesto and change things around from in this messiness to be a bit more clear where things are.
As a mother, how do you involve your family into the making? Do you have a special day of the week for that?
A really good question. I wish I was more organized. We don't necessarily have a day where it's dedicated time to making, because, to be honest, often on the weekends I also end up working, or my husband ends up working, so we don't have a sort of clear routine or rituals considering this. We're more a spur of the moment family, so it'll be like yesterday, where somehow the boys ended up going to a graffiti event with my husband that he really wanted to see, so they got to see graffiti artists and virtual reality technical equipment they could try out there, and they could watch and experience this, whilst I stayed home with my daughter. She didn't want to go along, and we decided to bake. So we sort of spent the afternoon creating this great big mess in the kitchen, and we had such fun because we were playing music and we were laughing and, I don't know, making up stories about the biscuits. So it's more of a thing that happens to us when we're creative, and afterwards I'll realize, we'd had a really, fun time being creative together. I only organize these kind of things by bringing materials on our holiday, so we have much more time and space, and I have many more ideas of what could happen when we're away, when we're traveling, or when we're going to one of our weekend sort of escapes. We're often set to also make something. I don't know if I could encourage the kids with being more organized, or if it's actually quite a good thing that in our family it's more of a spontaneous event to be creative. It happens when it comes, when it comes over like a wave, then anyone who wants to be part of this making joins in, and those who are not into it, you have to let be. It doesn't need to be all 5 of us making something together. Sometimes that happens, but I wouldn't be able to pinpoint what it is that we organize in those moments. I would say it's the opposite. It's something that happens to us rather than something that we set out to do. And this holiday I took all my beads, because in my childhood I used to make these bead bracelets on a sort of tiny hand improvised loom, and we did exactly that. We just hammered nails into bits of wood to have these improvised looms, and my 2 youngest children were really excited to join in. And when we had actually produced some bracelets, and I was working on this big necklace to write the alphabet for my daughter, because she's still learning the alphabet at school, and once we'd produced some stuff, then my eldest also got interested, and he made his own bracelet with words again. So in a way it sort of travels, you know. I have the idea to bring this material, and then that opportunity gets taken up.
As I mentioned it on the intro, you're also the maker behind the self-publication zine called Yarnchix. Can you explain a little bit what is exactly a zine?
So a zine is an analog handmade magazine. It's also called a fanzine, and it comes from a more political or punk way of publishing. It's very cut and paste and ready, steady, go. So you can create a zine within a day, and that's what I set out with the Zinist, which is a new collection that I started. But the Yarnchix Zine itself started already in the beginning of last year. It was something that was in the makes for around 4 or 5 months. It was just in my head, and then it took about 2 months to get going. It came a lot from conversations with my collaborator and illustrator friends, Caroline Fred, because I told her, look, I really want to make a zine. I think the knitting publications nowadays, they're really amazing. They're really out there. They're so beautifully made. But there is a political side to knitting, which I feel sometimes gets maybe pushed aside. And I love zines. A knitting zine would be my perfect way of putting the sort of hodgepodge, messy ideas I have into a way of being out there, being ready for someone to pick up, but not having this long, drawn editorial publication phase. Basically, I can have the idea, I can write my stuff, and it can be out there within a week. Like I'm steadily working away on the 4th issue at the moment, and I know once I pick up the speed with that, it should be done within a week. I've pushed it a bit back, but I feel that that's also why the zine came about for me, because I need to have this non-deadline creative outlet where I write and I make and I pull together as a curator the ideas by different people slowly. And then once everything is pulled together, all the collaborators have sort of sent me their ideas either by post or by email. Some texts I will then have to type up, because a zine is literally cut and paste. I type on the typewriter, I write by hand, I draw, other people draw or design their pages, and then in the end it is entirely made on a photocopy machine. So I will go to a photocopy shop and copy the colored pages separately to the black and white pages. I will then have to create a sort of, and I do this on the go, layout pages. I then stick all the illustrations of these little yarn chickens. They're like woolly hens that have either their knitting in hand or some wool or some knitting shopping. And these are drawings that Caroline Fred contributes, I will stick them onto pages where there's space, and then I will sew the whole thing up once I'm at home. So then I have to fold all those pages, make sure they're in the right order, and it makes entire sense. And I have a nice little, the center fold will always be like a nice little color creation, an artist collaboration that will go in, and then I will sew up every zine ready for people to buy. I sell on Etsy, and through Patreon I have a subscription where you pay me $5 monthly, and around every 3 to 4 months you will have a zine on your doorstep. So you don't have to go to Etsy and order it. You literally just, it will come as soon as it's printed. So when I come home from the copy shop, I will sew up the 10 subscriptions, I think it is at the moment, and I will send them out first thing, so they get a sort of pre-release phase.
What do you enjoy the most about making the zine?
I think this freedom. It's a freedom of making and putting my thoughts onto paper. It is self-published, and it creates this moment of being able to share something that brews in my mind for weeks and months, potentially, sometimes even just a moment. It's just a spare of a moment text, and then I get to share it, and some people read it and appreciate it. And I know it's hyper niche, it's like a super specific way of creating an outlet, and I kind of enjoy that secrecy. Or no, it's not really a secret, because I want it to be out there and I want more people to find out, but I like this way of sharing, and that's what a zine is. It's a way of sharing analog, quick thought and creative inspiration, and it's there for people to pick up, and I enjoy that. It creates a kind of community through this publication that otherwise wouldn't exist, and I hope it inspires others to feel more flexible, to feel more spontaneous and inspired to make things without thinking about it too much. Basically just putting things out there and seeing what happens.
Would you say that this zine is only for knitters, or would you say that it's open also for other kind of creative minds?
I think it's very open to all sorts of creativity, and also all sorts of inspiration. I always have the tarot card in there. I'm very interested in creating sort of spiritual ways of dealing with our knitting or making. And in the next zine there will be instructions for patchwork, for quilting. A very creative soul and collaborator called Lisa. She's Erica Eccles on Instagram. She will contribute a little drawing to set people up for quilting, and she set me up in that way, and I was very happy when she said I can share it in the zine. So there will be more sewing. There's always recipes for baking or cooking. And the writing is actually out there for everyone and anyone to feel inspired to maybe create or look at the world differently. There's like a craftivism and craftivism page with ideas of how to stop and stumble over stuff in your urban or natural surroundings. And the interviews I always find super fun to make, and there's a lot of learning about people's wool businesses, but also inspirations in their lives that are being shared. I think it's quite good, it's quite open.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
5 years' time, I will have one almost young adult, and I think he will be on his way to choose where he wants to go, what he wants to do in life. So he will be in his last year of school, so that will be interesting to see how this character goes out into the world and makes his own path. And I think we will still be in Berlin. We're pretty much rooted here now. Maybe I will have had more time to write. So at the moment, that's my personal dream, is in 5 years' time there will be a book with all my ideas in, and people can pick that up from their knitting shops or in a library. That is my dream.
Wow, that sounds exciting. Let me know, eh? I will get one of those.
Thank you, Raquel.
You're really great. I mean, I'm so happy that I'm doing the first interview of this Handscape podcast is with you, because I really like what you're doing. Really, I'm sorry if I repeat myself a lot, but I like your mess, Mimi.
Yeah, that makes me happy.
I really like it. I feel very identified with it, and I think sometimes I have friends.
Thanks so much for being with Mimi and I this week. Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter in case you want to receive the last episodes right in your email every time they come up. You can subscribe at handscape.org. Have a lovely weekend and see you soon.